Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Yud Daled of Masechta Pesachim, Daf 114. Man, we're almost like getting close to the end over here of Masechta Pesachim. The thing is, I don't really want it to end. Arvei Pesachim is so geschmack. I'm a little bit nervous to finish it. Anyways, today's a great daf. We talk about some interesting things. So at the very beginning, we just finish off some Agadata from the last few days. It's been an interesting journey. We get back to like Seder kind of things. The order of kiddush, Machlokas Beishami and Basil, about what comes first, Boi Piragafin or like the kiddush bracha. And then we discuss Karpas and Maror, which is very, very interesting from the Seder, and the Machlokas about if Mitzvot require kavana or not. So very interesting stuff on today's daf. Let us begin on daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Aleph, 3 lines into the page. Amar Rabba bar Bachana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishmim de Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. Wah! So sometimes we see that Rabbi Yochanan quotes Reb Shimon. That comes up from time to time. Here he's quoting Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, who was a contemporary of Reb Shimon from that same generation. Echol batzal v'shev betzel. Eat onions and sit in the shade of your own home. V'lotechol avozim v'tanagolin, rather than spending all your money on eating geese and chickens. V'elibcha rodef alecha, and you're just going to be chasing after them and spending all your money on that. Meaning, better to eat onions, which are pretty cheap, which then means that you have money to afford a house. So rather do that than to spend money on all sorts of fancy foods, but you don't have somewhere to live. And you're just going to be chasing after those foods, and you won't have money to buy a house. Pachos mimeichlech umimishtech v'sosif adiroscha. Again, spend less on your food and drink, and rather use that money to increase your house. Ki also Ula Omar, when Ula came to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael, he said, Masla Maslan b'Marava. There's a parable, a mashal in Eretz Yisrael, which is to Achil Al Yisa Tashi Ba'alisa. Somebody who spends all of his money eating aliyah. Remember the aliyah? It's the fatty tail of the sheep that is offered as part of the korbanos. But somebody who basically spends his money on fatty meat, well then what's going to end up happening, interestingly, is that then when the people knock on his door to collect money that they're owed, he's going to run into hiding because he doesn't have money to pay people back because he spent all of his money on fatty foods, fatty meats. Dachil kakule, where somebody who eats vegetables, akikli demaso shachiv. So interestingly, it means like by the garbage dumps of the city, he will sit. Now, that doesn't sound like a positive thing, but apparently it actually is. Meaning, he'll be able to go to a place where everybody is over there, and out of all the people, this fellow who eats vegetables won't have to worry that anybody is gonna come and ask him to pay them back money that he owes or anything. No, he eats vegetables, and he can control his, stay on top of his finances. And when he's with everybody else, he's the one who doesn't have to worry that he owes anybody anything. Alright. Let's go weiter in Shas. Nu Mishnah Mozgulo Kos Rishon. So they pour for him the first cup at the beginning of the Seder. So the Seder begins. We're up to Kaddish. They pour for him the first cup. So Bishami says, what you do now is you first make the bracha al hayom. You basically say kiddush, right? Asher kiddushan mitzvot. What was it? Asher b'chabanu mikolam v'amanu mikolashim kiddushan mitzvot v'atitin lanu Hashem Elokeinu b'ahava, or depending if it's Shabbos or whatever. So that, so kiddush. So going to Bishami, first you say kiddush, v'achar kach mevarach al yayin, and then afterwards you say bor pirgafen after that. Whereas Basila says, no, first you say Boi Priagafen, and then you say the bracha Asher b'chabanu mikolam. So, and that's what we do. Okay? Very, very interesting. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Dvarim sheben Bishami Basila Basuda. We've seen this in Masechta Brachos in the 8th parak, that the things that are machlokas, the difference between Bishami and Basila when it comes to a meal, Bishami o mevarach al hayom, achar kach mevarach al hayoyin. So Bishami says first you make the bracha of kiddush, and then you make the bracha Boi Priagafen afterwards. How come? For two reasons. Number one, because it's the day that's causing the wine to come. Meaning, even though during the week you might drink wine with your meal, however, during the week you'll drink wine during the meal. You don't usually drink wine before the meal. Why are we drinking wine before the meal? Because it's Shabbos. And therefore, if the only reason, or Yom Tov, the only reason that this wine that you're drinking right now is coming, the only reason why you're drinking this wine right now before the meal is because it's Shabbos or Yom Tov, and therefore make the bracha first on the Shabbos or the Yom Tov, and then afterwards make a bracha on the wine, because the wine is only coming in the first place because it's Shabbos/Yom Tov. And reason number two is that also the kedusha of the day comes before the wine. Kilu, when you bring in Shabbos or Yom Tov, or when it becomes, Rashbam interestingly says Teisa Kochavim. Generally at least we stop doing malacha from Shkia, that's for sure. Whatever it is, but meaning whenever Shabbos or Yom Tov started, you didn't necessarily, it started before you even brought out the wine to make kiddush. So therefore, for those two reasons, because the only reason why you're making a bracha on this wine right now before the meal is because it's Shabbos/Yom Tov, and also because Shabbos/Yom Tov was able to begin before you even brought out any wine. So for both of those reasons, you're going to make a bracha first on the kiddush hayom, and then you make a bracha on the wine afterwards. Basil says, first you make a bracha on the wine, then afterwards you make a bracha on kiddush hayom. Because it's the wine that causes the kiddush to be said. Friends, what happens if you don't have wine? So you make kiddush on bread. What happens if you don't have bread? What happens if you don't have wine or bread? You don't make kiddush. And therefore, it's really the wine/bread, but let's focus on the wine now. It's really the wine that is the determining factor of whether or not you're going to make kiddush, and therefore make a bracha on the wine first. Or another reason, birkas hayayin tadira, birkas hayom eino tadira. The bracha on wine, ber priagafen, you say all the time. Anytime you want to drink wine during the week, you're going to say ber priagafen. Whereas birkas hayom, no, kiddush hayom, you only say on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So therefore, of course we know, as a general rule, that when you have something that is consistent and something that is, less regular, something that's regular and something that's irregular, so the thing that is regular takes precedence. And therefore, since you regularly say the bracha of Bar Priagafen when there's wine, so therefore you make the bracha of Bar Priagafen first, and then you make the Kiddush Hayom. The halacha is like Beis Hillel. My davar acher. How come Beis Hillel had to give two reasons? Why was the first one not enough? That you're only making kiddush because you have wine, so therefore the wine comes first. Well, because if you're going to say that Beis Shammai gave two reasons for their opinion, reason number one is that you're only drinking wine in the first place because it's Shabbos/Yom Tov, and reason number two is because Shabbos/Yom Tov started before there was even any wine on the table. So, since Beis Shammai gave two reasons, so if Beis Hillel would only give one reason, well then you might think, well, Beis Shammai, we must pass on like Beis Shammai, because they give two reasons. So, Achanami, Tarteninu, Tadav Shenu Tadav Tadav Kodem. Therefore, Beis Hillel could say, no, we also have two reasons. Number one, that, well, if you don't have any wine, you don't make any kiddush, so therefore it's sort of the more significant of the two. And number two is that Tadav Shenu Tadav Tadav Kodem, that whatever is regular precedes that which is irregular. Ve'alacha Kedivrei Beis Hillel, and we said that the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Pshita, obviously the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Donafik Paschal. We learned in Daf Yud Gimel Masechta Eruvin that a voice came out of heaven and said that we rule like Beis Hillel. So Yibai Seima Kodem Baskol, Yibai Seima La'achar Baskol, V'B'Shur Hi Da'amar Imashkichim B'Vaskol. So two possibilities. One is that this was before the Baskol. The Baskol only came out of heaven and determined that the halacha is like Beis Hillel during the days of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Now, Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, certainly Hillel and Shammai were before then. So therefore, it's possible that when we say that the halacha is like Beis Hillel, this was taught before the voice came out of heaven during the days of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. So that's option number one. So at that point, it wasn't established yet that the halacha was always like Beis Hillel. So therefore, the Mishnah is saying that the halacha is like Beis Hillel. The other option is that it's after the voice came out of heaven. But interestingly, you could say that this Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, who says that we don't hold of bas calls, right? Imagine you're Rabbi Yeshua, your entire life, you had machlokas Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. It wasn't determined that we always passing like Beis Hillel. All of a sudden, one day a voice comes out of heaven and says that we passing like Beis Hillel. So he says, look, we don't listen, we don't pass in halacha like a voice that comes out of heaven, and therefore we continue to look at the machlokas, and if the machlok, and therefore we pass like either Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel, and says, and therefore in this particular case we pass like Beis Hillel. But according to Rabbi Yeshua, we don't necessarily listen, pass in halacha based on this magical voice that came out of heaven and said that halacha is like Beis Hillel. Very interesting. New Mishnah Heviu Lefanov. If they brought out karpas, who could tell me what karpas is? Let's start from the beginning. Kaddish. Okay, we talked about kiddush urchatz. Okay, you go and you wash your hands. Now we're up to karpas. So karpas is we take a vegetable, and we dip it in salt water. Now, interestingly, we don't seem to say anything about salt water per se, but you take a vegetable and you dip it. So, Eviu Lefanov, Mitabu B'chazeres, Achmagia Lefarperes Apas. So what you do is, Mitabu B'chazeres means that you take chazeres, which is maror, which is romaine lettuce, and as the Rashbam says, it doesn't have to be romaine lettuce. I mean, most of us, I imagine, don't use romaine lettuce for karpas, although I'm curious if somebody here does. We use potatoes, lemaisa. But, so you take the vegetable, it could even be romaine lettuce, and you dip it. It doesn't say what you dip it in. Even though this is before you're getting to the maror that you're going to have later on with the matzah. Right? So basically, we're having maror twice. Right? We're having romaine lettuce during karpas, and then later on, when we get to matzah, we're also going to have maror then. Okay? Have you the fun of matzah v'chazeres v'charoses v'shnei tavshilin, and then later on, when they bring in front of him matzah and maror and charoses and 2 cooked dishes, afapisha and charoses mitzvah, even though charoses is not actually a mitzvah. Okay, Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok Omer mitzvah. Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok says charos taka is a mitzvah. Okay, uv'mikdash ayimivin lefan of gufa shel Pesach, and in the Beis Hamikdash, I guess at that point they would bring out the carcass of the korban Pesach. Okay, Zok the Gemara Amar Rish Lakish says Rish Lakish Zos Omeres mitzvos tz'rikhot kavana. Aha, says Rish Lakish that from this Mishnah we could determine that you have to have kavana, you have to have intention when you're doing a mitzvah, and if you do not have proper intention when doing a mitzvah, you are not yotze, you need to do it again. How come? Kevan de lo be'idan chiyuva demar hu de'achil lei. Since you're eating the karpas, since you're eating this initial romaine lettuce outside of the context of achilas maror comes later on. You eat the matzah, you eat the maror, this is something else. We'll find out what it is, but for now let's just say it's karpas. So since you are eating it at the time that you're not eating it as maror, you're just eating it for some other reason. So b'boi priya adama hu da'achile. So you just make boi priya gafen. What? Boi priya adama. V'dilma lo ichvun limar. And maybe he didn't have kavana to also be yotzei maror. Right? Since maror is coming late, right? Since the proper official place for maror is going to be later on. So he's not saying the bracha of alachilas maror. He's only saying the bracha of boi priya adama. And v'dilma lo ichvun limar. And maybe when he said this bracha boi priya gafe, I keep on saying that, boi priya adama, by the karpas, perhaps he did not have in mind to be yotzei the obligation of maror. And hilkach boi l'mahader la'atbule l'shem maror. And that is why, later on, when we get up to maror, he needs to dip a second time, kilu in charoses, later on, when we get up to maror, so you dip the romaine lettuce a second time with the intention of maror, since possibly he didn't have the intention to be Yotzei Maror during Karpas. Because if it enters your mind to say that mitzvos do not require kavana, and if you do the mitzvah, even if you didn't have intention, you're still Yotzei, lo malach trei tibule. Well then, why should you have to dip the maror again later on? But he already dipped the maror and ate it the first time during Karpas. So rather, what must it be? That from the fact that you eat romaine lettuce during Karpas, and then later on you also eat the romaine lettuce again during maror, it must mean that mitzvos tz'rikhot kavana, you have to have proper intention when doing a mitzvah, and therefore we're concerned that maybe you didn't have intention to be yotzei the mitzvah of achilas maror when you were eating the karpas. That is why we do maror again a second time later on. But now the Gemara says, Mimai, why does this necessarily prove that mitzvos require kavana? Dilma lo mitzvos ein tz'rikhot kavana. Maybe really mitzvos do not require kavana. And then if you're going to say, but if mitzvos don't require kavana, and therefore memele, I was yotzei the mitzvah of eating maror when I ate the karpas, well then, why do I have to dip a second time later on? I was already yotzei the mitzvah. So that the children will be able to say, hey, what's going on? And ask questions. And that is why we do what's that called? Karpas in the first place. We do karpas, we dip this romaine lettuce, or really any vegetable, but even romaine lettuce, in the, whatever you dip it in. We don't say what you're dipping it in here, but you're dipping the romaine lettuce for karpas, that the kids are going to be like, hey, why are we dipping romaine lettuce right now? So, what do we see? So, the reason why you do karpas is that the children will ask. Later on, you're going to eat the romaine lettuce to be yotzei the chiyuv of maror. And you could say that theoretically, even once you ate the karpas, you're technically yotzei the mitzvah of maror, because you don't even have to have any intention when doing a mitzvah. And therefore, memele, when you ate the romaine lettuce in the karpas, you're yotzei the chiyuv of eating maror. So how come then we eat it again a second time? So that there will be this whole question thing like, hey, why are we eating maror twice? Didn't we already do it? That whole thing. But if that's the case, then if it's only so that the kids are going to ask questions, well then, why do you have to use romaine lettuce for karpas? Can't you just use any vegetable? If it's just that kids can ask, why are we specifically saying romaine lettuce? Use other vegetables, and the kids will be like, hey, why are we using vegetables for dipping right now? So the Gemara answers, if we would say that, yeah, technically that could work, but I might think that you only do karpas if you have more than one kind of vegetable. If you have romaine lettuce plus also potatoes, so then you would do karpas. But I might think that if all I had was romaine lettuce, well then I'll just do maror, I'll skip karpas. So Kamash Malon, Tafilu Chazer is Ba'inan Trei Tibule. So it's letting us know the kiddush that even if all you have is romaine lettuce, you would still do karpas. You would still dip it in karpas, and also during karpas, and also dip it later on for maror. So that there will be a distinction for the children, and an opportunity for the children to ask, why are we dipping 2 times? Okay. Very, very interesting. Fine. So where are we at? So where we're at is that Rish Lakish wanted to argue that from the fact that you're potentially dipping maror twice, must mean that mitzvahs require kavana. And if you don't have kavana, you're not yotzei. That's why you have to do it again for maror, so that we can be sure that you had kavana. To which the Gemara says, maybe mitzvahs do not require kavana, and memele, you're yotzei the chiyuv of achilas maror from the first time that you dip it, during karpas, and the only reason why we do it twice is so that the children are going to ask questions. V'od, and additionally, I can prove to you that mitzvos do not require kavana. Tanya, we learn in the Brisa, Achlon demai, if you ate maror that was demai, of course we know what demai is, maror that was bought from an Amma Arts that we're not sure if he separated Meiser or not. Yotza, you're going to be Yotze with the maror, as we've seen about 1,000,000 times, because theoretically he could just give up all of his possessions and become a poor person, then he will be able to eat demai. Achlon below miskavin, Yotza, that's the important part. If you ate the maror without having the proper intention to be Yotze the chiyuv of maror, you're nonetheless Yotze. Achlon lechatzayin Yotza, if you eat maror in like 2 portions, so like half a kazayas now and half a kazayas later, Yotza. It works. As long as you do not wait between the more than it takes to eat half of a bread of 8 eggs, that whole thing. Wheat bread. Part of the Eretz Chitu Sor, Gep Metain of Rimon, that whole thing. But basically, as long as you don't wait, pras, in between the two. So what do we see? So we see, Taka, that there's a Brisa that's saying that even though you didn't have kavana, you're still Yotze the Chiyuv of maror. So it's pretty clear that mitzvos ain't tz'rikhos kavana, and it's Taka, Kasha, and Rish Lakish. To which Rish Lakish responds, and he says, Tanoi, 1 second, don't throw me out like that so easily. It's a machlokas tanoim. The Tanya is within the Brisa. Reb Yossi Omer says, Reb Yossi, afapisha tiba b'chazeres mitzvah lahavi lefanav chazeres v'achroses v'shnei tavshilin. Again, Reb Yossi Omer says, Reb Yossi, afapisha tiba b'chazeres, even though you did karpas with romaine lettuce, mitzvah lahavi lefanav chazeres v'achroses, still later on, there's a mitzvah to bring more romaine lettuce as well as charoses. Vishnei tavshilin, and 2 cooked foods. Bakati mimai. Wait, so what do we see? So we see that even though you used maror for you used romaine lettuce for karpas, still you're going to bring it out again later on when it comes time for maror. So we see that mitzvos tz'rikhos kavana, you have to have kavana, and therefore even though you used romaine lettuce for karpas, you still need to take it out again for maror. But then the Gemara says vakati, but still. Mimai. How do we know that proves that Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvos tz'rikhos kavana? Dilma, because of Rabbi Yossi mitzvos ain't tz'rikhos kavana. Maybe Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvos do not require kavana. Okay. Well then, how come we're bringing out maror a second time? Well, for the same reason we've been saying all along. Said the children are going to ask questions. Right? So I could theoretically argue that even according to Rabbi Yossi, mitzvos do not require kavana. When you ate the romaine lettuce as part of karpas, you were yotze the mitzvah of maror. And we bring it out later just so that the children will see, like, wait, what's going on, and ask questions. Imkain my mitzvah. The Gemara says, no, don't say that. Don't say that Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvahs ain't tz'rikhos kavana. Because what does he say? If you look at what Rabbi Yossi says, he says, mitzvah lahavi, right? He says, afapisha tiba b'chazeres, mitzvah lahavi l'fanav chazeres v'charosos v'shnei tavshilin. He says, even though you already used romaine lettuce for karpas, it's nonetheless a mitzvah to bring it out a second time. I.e., he wasn't yotze the mitzvah the first time because mitzvahs tz'rikhos kavana. So Rish Lakish says, I have Rabbi Yossi to rely upon, and of course we know that Rabbi Yossi is not a bad person to rely upon. Let's go weiter. My shnei tavshilin. What are these 2 mysterious cooked foods that we're talking about? Amar Rav Huna says, Rav Huna silka v'aroza, beets and rice. Rava Madar Silka Varosa. Rava would therefore try to get beets and rice. Interesting. Since that's what Rav Huna said, which is also interesting. Super interesting, right? Rav Huna was early on, right? Rav Huna was a student of Rav. Rava was a student of Rabba, Rav Nachman. But you don't really see Rava interacting with Rav Huna too often. But because Rav Huna used beets and rice, Rava made a point of using beets and rice because he wanted to do like Rav Huna. Very interesting. Because we even see that Rava's fearless. Rava sometimes argues with Rav Yehuda, who was like the same generation as Rav Huna. Maybe he was slightly younger. But Rava doesn't seem to have a problem arguing with Rav Yehuda, as we've seen in certain places. He even felt he got himself into trouble because of it. But Rav Huna, on the other hand, he really apparently had quite a lot of respect for. As the Rashbam says, what does the Rashbam say? Says Rashbam, because Rav had a certain affection for Rav Huna, a certain respect for Rav Huna, and therefore he wanted to show that we davka are going to do like Rav Huna. There's also taka, I think it's a Gemara in Moed Kain at the end, that Rava asked for the sharpness of Rav Huna. Anyways, Vayter Amar Vashi says, Avasi Shmamina mid Rav Huna delays the chayish leha to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And says Rav Ashi, from the fact that Rav Huna eats rice, like Mamish cooks rice and eats it on Pesach, so we see that the halacha must not be like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. The Tanya is within the Brayso of Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, Orez min daganu, v'chayavan achimutzo karis v'adam yotzei bo yidei chavasu b'Pesach, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that Orez, rice, is actually a type of grain, and you could be yotzei, if you make matzah out of rice flour, you'll be yotzei, and if it's chametz, you'll be chayiv karis. From the fact that Rav Huna doesn't seem to have a problem with boiling and eating rice on Pesach, so then clearly Rav Huna disagrees, or does not, can't disagree with the Tana, but he does not hold, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's opinion, that rice would be considered a regular grain, since Rav Huna eats it on Pesach. Chizkiya Amar afilu dag uveitza sha'alav. So Chizkiya says an interesting pshat, which is even if you have some fish and you baste it with some egg, that would be considered two cooked foods. Rav Yosef Amar tzarich shnei minei basar. Rav Yosef says that you need two types of meat. Echad zeichel Pesach, v'echad zeichel Chagiga. One to remember the Korban Pesach, and another to remember the Korban Chagigas Yudalit that you would eat as the main meal of the on Seder night. Ravina Amar afilu gaimo v'shula. Ravina says you can even use some meat that was cooked in some kind of a stew. That would be considered two tavshilin chevre. That was taf kuf Yudalit Masechta Pesachim. I hope you enjoyed it. It was geschmack, right? Right. So at the beginning we wrapped up some Agadita from Rabbi Yehuda about not spending too much money on fancy things and rather invest in a house. Then we discussed the order of Kiddush. Beis Shammai says Kiddush and then wine. Beis Hillel says wine and then Kiddush, right? Beis Shammai says that first you'd make the Kiddush Hayom and then you'd say Bar Pri Hagafen, whereas Beis Hillel says first you say Bar Pri Hagafen and then you say Kiddush Hayom. Very nice. Then we discussed Karpas and Mar, and we saw an interesting machlokas about do mitzvahs require kavana or not. The logic being, well, theoretically, if all you have is romaine lettuce, and you use romaine lettuce for Karpas, so we say that you still need to eat romaine lettuce again later on to be out to the chiyuv of achilas mar. So Rish Lakish wanted to argue that means that mitzvahs require kavana, and therefore we're concerned that you didn't have kavana when you ate the romaine lettuce the first time around, so therefore you have to do it a second time to make sure that you have kavana. Whereas the opposing view is that no, mitzvahs do not require kavana. And once you eat the karpas, if it's romaine lettuce, so then you taka yotze the mitzvah of mar. So how can we do it later on? So that the children will say, hey, didn't we already do this? And ask kashis, which is the theme of the Seder night. Chevra, I hope you enjoyed Daf Kuf Yudalet. Peace out.